So tell your dead mama dig her ass up and post a picture that look better than my motherfucking mama. What's wrong with?
Stop scrolling, because when 50 Cent decides to speak, it never feels casual. It feels calculated, it feels deliberate, and when shocking disrespect allegations began circulating online. The internet was already buzzing, but the second 50 stepped into the conversation, the entire temperature shifted, timelines froze, screenshots multiplied, comment sections turned into digital battlegrounds. Because whether you support him or critique him, one thing is undeniable: when 50 hits post, the conversation doesn't stay quiet. It amplifies. Now let's be real, 50 Cent has built a reputation on bold responses and unfiltered commentary. So when his name attached itself to these allegations, it didn't feel like a minor reaction. It felt like a moment. Veteran mogul. Energy colliding with controversy in real time. Was this accountability? Was it escalation? Or was this the internet doing what it does best, turning a spark into a spectacle? Because once influence enters the equation, the scale changes instantly. And trust me, this situation didn't just trend, it detonated the moment the allegations began circulating online. The conversation didn't start loud, it started curious. Screenshots appeared, commentary pages began reposting fragments. People started asking questions. What happened? What was actually said? Was context missing? In the early hours, it felt like another fast-moving social media storm building quietly in the background. But then one key factor changed everything. 50 Cent responded. When 50 enters a trending situation, the scale immediately shifts. His presence online isn't passive. It's strategic, deliberate, and historically impactful. Whether he's joking, criticizing, or addressing something serious, his posts travel. They don't sit quietly in a corner of the internet. They ripple outward, pulling commentary pages, blogs, and reaction channels into orbit. That's not exaggeration. That's influence at work. Supporters quickly framed his response as standing firm on principle. They argued that when something feels disrespectful, especially in public spaces, silence can be misinterpreted. To them, speaking out wasn't escalation, it was reinforcement. It was drawing a visible line. And in digital culture, visible lines matter because perception often shapes reality. Critics, however, approached the situation differently. They questioned whether public collects create more spectacle than resolution. In an algorithm-driven world, attention is currency. When a major figure addresses controversy, the controversy grows. That doesn't automatically mean the response is wrong, but it does mean the amplification becomes part of the story. What makes this moment complex is how quickly perception solidified. Within hours, the internet wasn't just debating what happened, it was debating intention, tone, timing. Was the response measured? Was it strategic? Was it emotional? Commentary channels replayed posts and clips repeatedly, analyzing phrasing like courtroom evidence, and once that cycle begins, it feeds itself. Another layer emerged as generational themes entered the conversation. 50 Cent represents a generation that navigated media through structured channels, interviews, press appearances, curated messaging. Today's public figures operate in a landscape where posts travel globally in seconds. The difference in pace alone can create tension. What once required a press conference now requires a caption. Supporters of 50 argued that experience brings perspective. They suggested that veteran voices understand long-term reputation in ways younger public figures are still learning. From that viewpoint, speaking out isn't about drama. It's about preserving standards. It becomes symbolic rather than personal. Meanwhile, others emphasized how quickly context can be distorted in the digital age. A clip without full background can travel faster than clarification. Nuance can disappear once reposted repeatedly. That doesn't erase accountability, but it complicates interpretation. And interpretation, in online culture, often overshadows confirmation. What's striking is that nothing physically dramatic occurred. No public confrontation unfolded. No staged showdown followed. Yet the digital energy felt intense. That intensity came from the weight of the names involved and the symbolism attached to the moment. When recognized figures intersect in controversy, even briefly, the engagement multiplies. The conversation also highlighted how influence reshapes scale. A trending debate might fade within hours under normal circumstances, but when someone with established reach addresses it, the timeline extends, new audiences become aware, new perspectives join the discussion. The ripple effect is immediate. As reactions continued pouring in, polarization became visible. Supporters doubled down on their stance, critics strengthened their concerns. Neutral observers began stepping back, questioning whether the situation had grown larger than its original context. That's common in digital culture. Amplification can transform proportion. Another key factor is expectation. 50 Cent has built a public persona rooted in boldness. His audience anticipates direct commentary. When he speaks, they expect impact. That expectation shapes reaction before the words are even fully processed. Brand identity influences interpretation. At the same time, younger public figures navigate a different environment entirely. Constant visibility, instant feedback, minimal delay between action and reaction. In that ecosystem, every moment carries potential for magnification. One response can become headline material within minutes. That pressure changes how situations unfold. What began as an allegation quickly became a broader conversation about public responsibility. Should influential figures address controversial claims directly? Does public accountability require visibility, or does visibility intensify tension unnecessarily? These aren't simple questions, and the debate reflected that complexity. As the first wave of noise settled slightly, what remained wasn't chaos, it was scrutiny. The internet shifted from reacting emotionally to analyzing strategically. What would happen next? Would there be further responses? Would the conversation cool naturally? Or would it resurface through future commentary? In digital culture, silence can be interpreted as strategy. It can signal resolution, or it can signal patience. The absence of escalation doesn't erase the moment, it simply shifts it into waiting mode. And waiting mode often feels heavier than noise. Right now, the narrative sits suspended between amplification and aftermath. The initial shock has passed, but the memory remains fresh. Screenshots still circulate, opinions still form. The ripple effect hasn't fully settled. And when influence intersects with controversy, full settlement rarely happens quickly. The real story, at this stage, isn't about a single response. It's about scale. It's about how quickly a moment expands when a powerful voice enters the equation. It's about how perception accelerates once attention locks in. And it's about how modern digital culture turns reaction into extended narrative almost instantly. The question now isn't just what was said, it's how the moment evolves from here. Because in the age of constant visibility, evolution matters more than eruption. And when someone like 50 Cent speaks, evolution tends to move fast. Once the first wave of reactions settled, something interesting happened. The conversation didn't shrink, it expanded. What started as one response turned into layers of interpretation stacked on top of each other. Reaction videos multiplied, commentary threads grew longer, podcasts jumped in. Suddenly, this wasn't just a moment, it was a full-blown discourse cycle. Memes began doing what memes do best, turning tension into satire. Some users framed this situation like a generational press conference. Others joked that whenever controversy trends, 50's notification bell lights up automatically. Humor didn't erase seriousness, but it amplified visibility. And visibility in the digital age is oxygen. Supporters leaned further into the accountability narrative. They argued that public figures with influence have a responsibility to address situations head-on. To them, silence equals passivity. They viewed the response as drawing boundaries in a world where lines often blur quickly. In their eyes, boldness reinforces respect. Critics, however, focused on amplification mechanics. They questioned whether the response unintentionally magnified the controversy. In algorithm culture, engagement fuels momentum. The more powerful the voice, the bigger the spotlight. And sometimes that spotlight grows faster than context can keep up. As the debate evolved, the tone shifted from emotional reaction to cultural analysis. Commentators began asking broader questions. How should influential figures respond to controversy? Is public accountability more effective than private resolution? Does social media reward confrontation more than calm dialogue? These weren't simple arguments, they were layered discussions. Generational dynamics remained a central theme. Veteran figures often carry reputational weight built over decades. Younger public personalities operate in an environment shaped by instant feedback and non-stop exposure. That contrast creates friction, not necessarily hostility, but different communication speeds, different thresholds, different expectations. Another factor fueling the conversation was history. 50 Cent's brand has long included sharp commentary and calculated confrontation. His audience doesn't expect neutrality, they expect engagement. So when he responds, supporters interpret consistency, critics interpret escalation. Both perspectives feed the same cycle of attention. Meanwhile, observers began noticing something subtle. The absence of direct escalation. There was no visible back-and-forth spiral, no dramatic exchange unfolding publicly. Instead, there was tension through interpretation. Sometimes anticipation feels louder than confrontation. The possibility of what could happen often sustains more engagement than what actually does. Digital culture thrives on unresolved moments. When a situation doesn't immediately explode or fully dissolve, it lingers. It becomes a reference point. Comment sections keep revisiting it, threads resurface. The story doesn't disappear, it hovers. And hovering narratives often gain depth over time. Another interesting shift occurred in how audiences framed respect itself. For some, respect is enforced through visibility. For others, it's preserved through restraint. The disagreement wasn't just about individuals anymore. It became about philosophy. How do public figures protect standards in an era of non-stop exposure? As hours turned into days, the outrage softened into observation. The loudest reactions faded slightly, replaced by watchful curiosity. What would happen next? Would there be clarification, silence, further commentary? The uncertainty kept the narrative alive. The biggest takeaway from this phase is scale. Influence doesn't just change tone, it changes trajectory. A trending conversation can remain local or become national depending on who enters it. When a powerful voice speaks, the spotlight expands automatically. Right now, the story isn't defined by confrontation. It's defined by momentum. Momentum built from perception, amplified by influence, sustained by curiosity. And in the modern media cycle, momentum is sometimes more powerful than conflict itself. The real cliffhanger now isn't what was said, it's what follows. Because in digital culture, aftermath often shapes memory more than the initial moment. And everyone is watching to see how this one settles. As the dust began to settle, the volume of the conversation didn't vanish, it matured. What started as a burst of shock slowly transformed into something heavier and more reflective. The outrage cooled, but the memory stayed warm. Screenshots remained saved. Clips continued circulating, and the narrative entered its next phase. The phase where moments become markers. Because here's the truth about digital culture. Once something trends at full speed, it rarely disappears completely. It archives itself. It becomes searchable. It becomes reference material. The internet doesn't forget, it bookmarks. And when influential names are attached to controversy, that bookmark becomes even brighter. For 50 Cent, the aftermath reinforces what has always defined his public identity: directness. His brand has never relied on silence. Supporters expect him to speak when he sees something he disagrees with. That expectation protects his consistency. Even critics acknowledge one thing: he doesn't pretend neutrality when he feels strongly. And consistency in media culture often outweighs perfection. At the same time, the broader conversation shifted toward consequences of amplification. Not legal consequences, not physical consequences, but reputational ones. When influential voices weigh in, The ripple effect extends beyond the original moment. More eyes, more scrutiny, more commentary, and sometimes more misunderstanding. For younger public figures navigating visibility, that amplification can feel like standing under stadium lights without warning. The pace of social media leaves little room for gradual clarification. Once a narrative forms, it spreads quickly. Context often trails behind virality. That imbalance defines much of modern public life. What's interesting is that the absence of explosive escalation actually intensified curiosity. There was no dramatic showdown, no extended public back and forth. Instead, there was silence layered with speculation. And silence in the digital era can feel louder than noise. It creates space for interpretation. It keeps observers refreshing. Timelines dot another layer to this aftermath is audience alignment. Supporters on both sides became more entrenched in their perspectives. Debates didn't convert many opinions, they solidified them. That's common in online discourse. Moments of tension often deepen loyalty rather than shift viewpoints. And deeper loyalty fuels longer conversations. The conversation also revealed something about influence mechanics. When a figure with reach addresses controversy, they don't just participate in the narrative, they reshape its scale. What might have faded becomes extended. What might have remained niche becomes mainstream. That power isn't inherently positive or negative. It's simply impactful. As days passed, commentary evolved into broader cultural reflection. People began discussing how public accountability functions in a digital age. Should responses happen publicly because the controversy is public? Or does public engagement inherently magnify conflict? There's no universal answer, but the debate itself reveals how deeply social media has altered communication norms. The generational theme didn't disappear either. It lingered quietly beneath the surface. Veteran voices often operate from experience built before algorithms ruled attention. Younger voices navigate a landscape where algorithms decide visibility instantly. That difference in rhythm creates friction, not necessarily hostility, but contrast. And contrast sustains conversation. Perhaps the most significant outcome of this moment is symbolic. It serves as a reminder that perception accelerates faster than clarification. Once an influential name intersects with controversy, the narrative rarely stays proportional. It grows, it stretches, it evolves into something larger than its starting point. Yet, despite the intensity, there was no collapse, no visible implosion, no dramatic fallout that reshaped careers overnight. Instead, there was adjustment, public figures recalibrating tone, audiences recalibrating expectations. The moment transitioned from shock to scrutiny to observation. In the end, what remains isn't just the headline, it's the lesson about scale. Influence magnifies, visibility accelerates, and digital memory preserves the next time a similar situation unfolds. This moment may resurface as context, not because it exploded, but because it lingered. Right now, the narrative sits in a state of quiet awareness. Not chaotic, not resolved completely, just present, waiting. Because in online culture, stories rarely end with a single post. They pause, they rest, and sometimes they return when the timing aligns. And that's the real cliffhanger, not the initial reaction, not the surge of outrage, but how the memory of this moment shapes future reactions. Because once a powerful voice enters a controversy, the ripple doesn't stop immediately. It travels, and everyone watches to see where it lands next. Was 50 Cent reinforcing accountability when he spoke out, or did his response amplify a situation that might have cooled down on its own? Because let's be honest, once a heavyweight voice enters the chat, the volume doesn't stay the same. It spikes. Drop your honest opinion in the comments. Not the safe answer, not the neutral it depends. Break it down. Do you believe influential figures should address controversial claims publicly? Or does that just pour fuel on the algorithm and stretch the lifespan of the drama? And let's talk bigger picture. Is this about respect? Is it about generational communication styles? Or is it another example of how quickly perception becomes louder than proof in digital culture? I want your full analysis. If you enjoyed this deep dive, smash that like button like it owes you money. Subscribe